My name's Kevin. I am the creator of The Bible Artist, and this is the Bible Artist podcast. And specifically, it is the Bible verse discussion project, which we have been working on for a few months now. We are going through the story of David's time in the wilderness on the run from Saul as he's leading a band of outlaws. And we're talking about how we would adapt that story into a multi-season TV show, kind of like The Chosen. So we've been going through, we kind of did some big picture issues, we did an outline, and now we've been going through episode by episode, talking about what that story would look like. But before we get into it, really quick, Vic and Chad, would you guys like to introduce yourself?
Go ahead, Chad.
Yeah, I'm Victor, and no, wait, hold on. I'm Chad this time, right? Yeah, I'm Chad. Friend of Kevin, fan of all things The Bible Artist. I love Kevin's thinking and his creativity. I love getting to chat with Victor also here, and I'm a chaplain is what I do, and also do some freelance, like writing for a Bible study curriculum.
I'm Victor. I am a video producer in Lake Charles, Louisiana. I'm also a budding novelist. I've got my book I'm working on, The Sojourners. It's this is a fake cover. This is not a real cover just yet. It looks good though. But it's a Christian fantasy novel. I'm calling it like a reverse Narnia story. Hold on, there we go. And you can. I'm publishing a chapter a week at my Substack. It's substack.com/vicdigital. It's free, and we're on episode 8. So
awesome.
When you say it's a fake cover, what do you mean by fake cover?
It's not the actual book on the inside. It's just a cover that I made that looks nice. But I keep this on my desk so it inspires me to keep writing. Like having it sitting right there next to me, I'm like, man, I need to make sure I put some cool stuff inside this cover.
I'd say judging a book by its cover, that's a book that I would deem worthy of reading for sure. Yes. That's intriguing. It's cool.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah. And so definitely I think I had already put the link in the show notes, but if not, we've got it in previous show notes. And it's really really cool what Vic is doing on his Substack, and so definitely get signed up to get the chapters so you can be enjoying that story as it's unfolding.
It's free.
Yeah, nothing like a free story, which
there you go.
We're going to be doing here as well. We have been working our way through the story of David's time in the wilderness. So real quick kind of overview. We're getting towards the end of our story. We may get to the finale this week. We'll have to see. We'd have to get through 3 episodes. Last time we were only able to get 2, so probably a good chance that we'll only get 2 in here, and we may have to put off the last one for the next episode. But a quick summary: our story starts out with David. When he goes out on the run, he gets some help from the priests at Nob. Saul follows him, slaughters the priest there, and that starts out the story for one of our key characters, Abiathar, who is the son of the high priest. So all of his family, all of his city gets slaughtered by Saul. He has to go off on the run, and he eventually joins David's band of outlaws and people who are down on their luck, that are off in the wilderness, trying to avoid getting caught by Saul. Another one of our main characters is someone who was in Saul's army, but he got maimed, fell down on his luck, and eventually fell into debt slavery. At the beginning of our story, he runs away from debt slavery to Nabal, who's going to come in the episode that we're talking about today, episode 8. So he's in debt slavery to Nabal, runs away, also joins David's outlaws. Him and Abiathar become good friends in our story. Jehoiada, who's that slave, he also has a son who is taken from Jehoiada when he gets put into slavery. That son ends up in the household of Saul as kind of a servant for Saul's son, Jonathan. And so he's kind of been mentored a bit by Jonathan throughout our show. He's kind of like the pure character, a young man who, is kind of like David when David was a little bit younger and it had a little bit purer heart. We're going to see that a little bit as we go in our episodes today. We've also got, the villains in our show, obviously King Saul, his henchman, Doeg the Edomite. And then we've got a character called the Hittite, who will eventually be Uriah the Hittite, who many years from now, David is going to betray. But right now, he just got betrayed by Saul. Take a step back. He starts off the show in the service of Saul, and for the first few episodes, he's trying to hunt down David on behalf of Saul. He's a mercenary, but then around episode 6, I think, 6 or 7, he gets kind of betrayed by Saul's general Abner. He kind of gets left out there, kind of in a foreshadowing of what's going to happen with David. And he gets captured by the Philistines, and he's going to come back into the show in episode 10. We'll see if we'll get there or not. So those are our key characters. And as the story, kind of to talk in general terms, first half of the story, Saul is kind of really on the heels of David, trying to track him down. David briefly tries to join the Philistines, but he gets kind of rebuffed because some kind of trickery and stuff. And so and then he has this moment mid-season where he has a chance to kill Saul. This is a story in scripture. Saul's in a cave. David could kill him, but he spares him. It's a very powerful moment, but a lot of what drives the second half of our story is the response of his men to this moment. We look back on the story and we're like, oh, wow, David was so forgiving, so merciful for him to let Saul off. But his men in our story are really frustrated at this moment, because if David had just killed Saul, then all of their troubles would be done. Jehoiada, the slave, he wouldn't have to worry about going back into slavery. He could be reunited with his son, who he has just learned is in the service of Saul. Abiathar, he wants David to kill Saul because Saul wiped out his entire family. Abiathar's family, just like Saul, they are the anointed of Yahweh. They have kind of special protection. David wants to honor Saul and not put a hand on him, because Saul is God's anointed, the Lord's anointed. But Abiathar has a very good point that his family were the Lord's anointed as well, and Saul wiped them out. So Abiathar feels like Saul should have gotten killed. And then, meanwhile, in Saul's camp, what happens, when Saul's men find out that David had him at sword point and let him go, and Saul kind of like basically says, like, you're more right than I am. I know that God's going to make you king eventually. Saul says this in front of everybody, and so that kind of also puts a twist in Saul's situation. And so Saul's generals, they kind of try to course correct, and they steer things toward a war with the Philistines, which is going to be happening in episode 8, because they're hoping that by pushing Saul into another battle with the Philistines, that'll kind of regain confidence in him from the Israelite people and make people realize, like, oh yeah, this is why we're following this King Saul, because he leads us into war and into battles. Meanwhile, David, he's kind of dealing with his men who are feeling frustrated. Jehoiada, the slave character, he went on a brief escapade where he tried to save his son out of slavery. He actually brought him back in episode 7. He saved his son briefly. And so he brought him back to join the camp. And that's where he'll be at the opening of episode 8. Yeah, guys, anything I left out or any things that you guys want to call attention to or
Yeah,
Go for
like
it.
we've looked at this for like half a dozen episodes, and like I don't know if you went over this or not, but like what can you explain? This outline thing is still really cool.
Mhm.
What are the faded? What does it mean when like a little bubble is faded, and what does it mean when it's dashed?
Yeah, so some of this is like I haven't updated this outline very much from back when we first made it. And so the faded stuff, I think when I did it, I'm not even fully remembering, but I think the faded stuff was stuff where I was like not totally sure when I put it in there. I was like, okay, this is kind of a general idea. The dashed things, I think some of the dashed things were supposed to be like, it's probably like somewhere in here. Yeah, I'm actually forgetting what the dash things were. So,
Okay.
yeah, yeah, don't read too much into that.
Kevin, have
yeah.
you found that like because Kevin's the one who's prepared these episode kind of summaries and outlines and sketches. What I don't know what you'd call them. Have you found that like as you go throughout the season, like I feel like initially it's like I would guess it's easier to like start with your source material and be like, oh, we'll start with this passage here and then we'll put this one here. Have you found that as you're like fleshing out characters and trying to create arcs that like I'm not saying this is happening, but have you found that like if you're not careful, it's easy to like run away, like or not run away. Yeah, like to kind of get away from the source material because you need to make the characters make sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. There are definitely points where I'm like having to check against the material and be like, oh, okay, I had in my head that this is what he was going to do, but I guess I have to fit in and make this thing happen. So yeah, because as the story starts to kind of take on a life of its own and want to move in certain directions.
Yeah, I feel like that's got to be challenging, and just want to appreciate that like this is like it's taking on a life of its own, but you don't want to get so carried away that it starts to feel really distant, and yet you're dealing with real characters in the Bible whose motivations and actions aren't always spelled out, and there's gaps, and then creating characters also, from nothing that seem plausible, but you want to create an arc for them as well, and have those arcs like intersect and work with one another. It's just got to be massively challenging. So I love getting to come on this podcast and just get to ask you questions about how you tried to make it work. So anyways, I really appreciate what you've done, and it's really cool. I just feel like that's got to be one of the challenges.
Thanks, bro. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, and I don't know what I was going to say to that.
You don't have to say anything.
Sorry, one of you guys talk for a second.
Well, just kind of going along.
He really didn't know what to say to that. So
okay, never mind. Okay, but Victor, you can go ahead.
I was going to say it's like whenever we're creating new characters, we're trying to stay true to the Bible and not contradict it, and everything stays true to the spirit of what was happening. So even though we're creating some characters completely from scratch, or like in Uriah's case, we're inventing a whole bunch of backstory. I feel what you've done is you've really made it to where it feels like it could be the missing history, because it doesn't contradict anything, and it feels like it kind of illustrates and explains something that's there even more than what's already there, even though it's pure speculation on our part.
Thanks, man. Yeah, so let's get into it then. Cool. So like I said, we're going to be in episode 8. So this takes place after episode 7, where one of David's men kind of went on a unauthorized mission to save his son, and eventually did bring him back. And David kind of bailed him out, and they escaped to safety. Saul was pursuing them, but ultimately had to pull back because of the fight that his kind of leaders had started with the Philistines. So episode 8, this is one of our stories that so episode 6 and episode 7, they had some biblical events in them, but there's definitely a little more kind of room for creativity there. Whereas this one, we've got some created elements in it, but there's also kind of a more solid kind of biblical peg. We're doing the Nabal and Abigail story. The cold open. So it'll start out with one of David's men, Amasa, who we've kind of portrayed as a little questionable, a little bit of an antagonist among David's men, kind of vying for his own power and his own vision. So we have him approaching some shepherds who are working for Nabal, and he's kind of offering them, or kind of pushing them to seek protection with David's men. And so in that moment, we're seeing kind of this moment in scripture, like when we hear that kind of David's men have been kind of offering protection to the shepherds. It almost sounds a little bit like a mafia situation where, like when the mafia come and are like, looks like you guys could use some protection, and like are like kind of expecting to get paid off for it. So we're kind of setting that up, that bit up with Amasa going around to these shepherds. But it's also kind of David's men trying to establish David kind of as a rival king for Saul. And so they'd be kind of, Amasa would be kind of pointing out, like, Saul's not providing you the protection that you need. And, there's a new power that's rising, that kind of thing. Anything kind of on the cold open or? Okay, so then from there, for the rest of Act 1.
Kevin, I'll just say, now that you mentioned the mafia, I'm just going to be picturing people like wearing fedoras with like New York accents or something. So that's your fault. I can't get it out of my head now.
Nice. Act 1 will set up that the Outlaws, so they're kind of in a more kind of wilderness-ish location. We'll have them kind of low on food and supplies. They need to get food. They need to establish kind of connections and alliances and things like that. And it'll come up that Jehoiada will recognize that they are near where his old master Nabal would do, like had his base of operations, Carmel. And so it's suggested that they go because it's the time of the shearing feast, where wealthy farmers would put on these really lavish feasts because they would be kind of getting all the wealth as a result of shearing their animals, and all kind of the fruit of their labor. They'd be enjoying it. And so they suggest that because, Amasa and some of David's men have been going around and offering protection to the shepherds, that they should go and ask for food from Nabal and ask him to let them join the feast or whatever. So we're kind of just setting up that situation. Meanwhile, we'll introduce Abigail. She's actually introduced in episode 1, but we'll return back to Abigail for the first time in a while, and we'll kind of just establish, Nabal's a bit of a jerk. She's kind of getting supplies ready for the feast. She has to go on some sort of errand that takes her out of the household. And also, meanwhile, we've got Saul's army. They're going to be facing off against a superior Philistine force. It's kind of looking bad for them. But Jonathan has some sort of a kind of bold strategy that will require him and his men to do something risky. I don't have kind of the details of it plotted out, but that's kind of the gist. Anything on Act 1?
The only question I have, just kind of a, so I know at least in the Bible, Samuel dies around this part. How are we handling Samuel's death?
So
When?
Samuel's death was actually in episode 6.
Okay,
So that
kind of
was
remember.
the aftermath episode of when Saul, like after the event in the cave, Saul is kind of uh, moping around a little bit, and he goes to the funeral of Samuel, and it kind of connects because David cuts off Saul's robe, and Saul tore Samuel's robe, and kind of those two events are a little bit connected. So yeah, we have included that just earlier. Yeah. Okay, so continuing into Act 2, so Jehoiada is sent with a little delegation from David to request from Nabal that Nabal allows them to come in or sends them food, at least in honor of the protection that they've offered. Benaiah, Jehoiada's son, who's recently been reunited with him, goes along with him in that delegation. So we get some time for them to reconnect as father and son and kind of process through some of the things that have recently been happening. They'll deliver David's message. Nabal won't like immediately be there. They'll deliver it to some sort of emissary, like a right-hand man kind of person. And kind of as they're waiting, the emissary will basically be like, okay, I'll go talk to my master and I'll return. And as they're waiting, waiting for Nabal, Jehoiada will kind of be looking around. He'll realize that Abigail's not there. He had a positive relationship with Abigail from episode 1, and so he'll like talk to some of the servants and realize she's not there, and he'll send Benaiah with a servant to go get Abigail, because he'll realize like she should probably be here because Nabal's like a jerk, and if we have any hope of him listening to reason here, we need Abigail here. Before Benaiah and Abigail get back, Nabal will arrive. He'll be like super insulting to David. Here's like a point where it's really cool how like things, the story kind of, the biblical story kind of dovetails with the story we've been telling just accidentally. Nabal, he delivers this line about how like there are like lots of servants who've been running away from their masters lately or something like that, and he's primarily talking about David running away from his master, but within our story it has kind of this like second passive aggressive thing because Jehoiada is his own servant who's run away, and he's not gonna like try to recapture him because Jehoiada's with a few men who are probably strong warriors and stuff, but he's definitely like irked that they would send Jehoiada to come ask for this food and stuff. And yeah, so he insults David. Jehoiada's really frustrated, and they leave. And then meanwhile, back at the kind of the battle or preparations for the battle between the Israelites and the Philistines, Jonathan will kind of be he'll be like kind of praying to God, asking for mercy for Saul and for the army, kind of just recognizing that, we've been on the wrong track. My father, he's done horrible things, but still, you're a merciful God. Please, have mercy on us. And, he'll just kind of be getting ready for battle with his armor bearer, who we also established kind of from a flashback in a previous episode, that he's the guy who's like, I'll be with you heart and soul, in that earlier story in Samuel. Yeah, any questions on Act 2? Yeah, Jeff.
Yeah, Jehoiada and Benaiah, when it says they reconnect, is that conversation, do you envision that as where they're talking about their relationship, or is the goal that like I don't know, is it like a conversation that's like for us to, I don't know, for the characters to kind of make sense of the plot or something, or for them to make sense of. I don't remember what came before for them.
Mhm.
And then the last thing I was wondering is like, or is it? Are they talking about something that relates to one of our key themes? So I don't remember what comes before for each of them, and yeah. So what do you kind of envision for that conversation?
Yeah, that's a good point. So in last episode, Jehoiada kind of took matters into his own hands and went to get Benaiah. Like his initial plan was to either like kill Saul or try to, take by force his son. So he was definitely on the wrong track there. He didn't end up, killing Saul or anything, but things almost went really badly. And so he's probably kind of processing through all that and kind of having some regrets about the decision that he made and realizing that he shouldn't have taken matters into his own hands. At the same time, he's really grateful to be back with his son. Probably just asking him about kind of how he's been and learning a little bit through Benaiah and the experiences that he's been having. Yeah. So a little bit of like reconnecting relationship wise, but also trying to drive home some of those themes as the characters are kind of learning lessons or kind of processing lessons from some of the previous episodes.
Okay. Is Jehoiada realizing things, or is Benaiah challenging him at all? Or am I just getting too much into the details?
No. That's good. Yeah. I think it would probably be a mixture of both. Yeah. But yeah, it would probably be ideal to have Benaiah catch him on some things and like helping him realize certain things that he's like missing on his own. Yeah. So then moving into Act 3, Benaiah ends up finding Abigail, warns her, news arrives that Nabal has insulted David and his men. And so Abigail realizes like there's no time to lose. We gotta, so she like orders her servants to take some of the food that she's been collecting as preparations for the feast. And they're going to go try to kind of stave off or appease David for the insult that Nabal has given. Meanwhile, Jehoiada, he and his men have returned back to tell David, kind of report what Nabal said and the insult that he gave. And so Jehoiada is really frustrated by what Nabal did. He's already got bad blood with Nabal. And David is affronted by it. He's not immediately like provoked to like violent anger, in part because I forgot to mention this in Act 1. So the whole like protection ring angle of things, we would establish that that's something that David's general Joab kind of set up, like that he kind of got that all going while David was busy kind of trying to kind of get Jehoiada out of trouble. So when David kind of followed after Jehoiada, Joab kind of took matters into his own hands and kind of established that whole protection racket. So David feels like a little bit like uneasy about it. He gives in and is okay like doing it, but he might like if it had just been him, he might not have like responded quite as harshly in our story. But we'll have Amasa kind of provoking David, amplifying kind of how much of an insult this is, really trying to kind of needle him to the point where David finally says like, okay, guys, like strap on your swords. We're going to go march out to Nabal's people. Meanwhile, we'll have Jonathan, with the battle with the Philistines will be going on. Jonathan will kind of be rallying his men, trying to kind of keep their hope up. But his armor bearer will get struck and fatally injured. And then we'll have Abigail. She and her servants and Benaiah will have their the gifts and the bread and the food that they have prepared. They'll be going out to meet David and his men, but Abigail will be a little bit nervous because she's, a woman and a few servants going out to meet like a army of a few hundred armed men, which could go very badly for her. Benaiah is kind of like encouraging her to trust God and trust like David to be merciful, and to like have hope and stuff. Meanwhile, we'll see David and the outlaws approaching, Amasa kind of continuing to try to kind of drive David towards violence. And that'll be kind of the cliffhanger for that act. Anything for Act 3? I'll keep going for Act 4 then. So then Act 4, Jonathan's armor bearer, he was fatally injured and he'll finally die in Act 4, but he'll kind of give Jonathan some sort of, little pep talk that encourages him to have hope and keep fighting. Meanwhile, Amasa, he'll be urging David towards violence, but Benaiah will kind of come in and stop David's men and tell them to listen to Abigail, and that she has, he'll kind of get them to just listen to her and not act hastily. And Abigail will, she speaks words of wisdom, as she does in the biblical story. Would probably just kind of follow the lead of the story there. And David responds by blessing her, promising peace, kind of turning back his men. She basically kind of urges him to not take, to not like sully his hands with like unrighteous blood or things like getting, to kind of bring God's wrath down on himself by murdering, basically. And then meanwhile, Jonathan, he'll eventually kind of defeat the Philistines, like his plan works. And it'll also work with the help specifically of Palti. He's a character who's going to come in more in the next episode, but we'll kind of briefly set him up as a character who plays an important part in that battle. And then after Abigail is blessed by David, she'll go back to Nabal's household where the partying is going on, and she'll tell Nabal about what she did. And Nabal is like furious about it. He's drunk. He's violent. Like he might hit her, but then he gets struck by a heart attack, as he does in the biblical story. And that'll be kind of the close of the episode. So David didn't have to take matters into his own hands. God struck Nabal instead. So, anything for Act 4, or just the episode in general, Jeff?
So we have we have like David's camp and Saul's camp, like two stories. One, is there like sort of any sort of parallel, or are they exploring a similar theme? And then I also noted that the Saul's camp is like very much focused on Jonathan this episode, right? And kind of what do you see as like this episode? Where does he start and where does he end?
Yeah. So the parallel that I tried to draw is actually between Jonathan and Abigail / Benaiah. So kind of like they're both part of groups that are have either done or so like Jonathan, he's looking on what Saul has done, kind of the unrighteous things that he's done, and he's afraid that God is going to basically destroy them in judgment through the Philistines for what Saul has done, but he's praying, kind of having hope that God might have mercy, kind of in spite of his father's evil actions. Whereas Benaiah and Abigail, she's part of Nabal's household, and she's afraid that the household is going to get wiped out because of Nabal's evil actions, his insulting of David. But she's hoping that she can find mercy, and have kind of hope that David will have mercy on them, kind of in spite of what Nabal has done. And so she's kind of pleading to David for mercy, and putting kind of her hope in that. So that's kind of the rough parallel that I was going for there. Yeah.
One question I have, it's kind of knowing what's coming up with Abigail.
Mm-hmm.
Are we doing any kind of setup for, because I mean, just even in the Bible itself, it's like, oh, and he's going to make her his wife. It just seems to kind of come out of nowhere. And it's like, are we doing any kind of setup in
next
this
episode? Is all next episode is all wife stuff. Yeah.
But we're going to be doing any kind of setup to like that. This is the kind of thing that is possible in this world, because otherwise it still feels like one man, one woman is the way marriage works in the world for the most part. But yet we know it's different for David. So
yeah,
are we setting that up in any way?
That's a good point. It might be good to kind of seed some of that stuff in earlier episodes. Saul might even have more than one wife. I'd have to double check that, but I'm vaguely remembering that he potentially does. So we might be able to kind of seed that earlier in the season. This episode specifically, I didn't have that specific thing brought up, but we're gonna that's gonna be like kind of a major point of discussion for next episode. So yeah. Do you guys want to move on to that, or anything else with episode 8? Yeah, Chad.
Yeah, I guess maybe it's a stupid question. I'm assuming it's in Act 5, but like, what do you feel like is like the defining scene of this episode? Is it where Abigail pacifies with wisdom? Like, is that kind of like the takeaway kind of moment?
So I think that's kind of where she's seeing, like, if her decision to have hope and to kind of put herself out there on David's mercy, she's seeing if that pays off, basically. I mean, she speaks words of wisdom and stuff in that moment, but I think that's kind of the testing point of Benaiah has kind of been pushing her to have hope and to trust in David's mercy. So yeah, when she actually goes and speaks to David, she gets to, that's kind of the testing point for that. So yeah, I would say that interaction is one of the key ones. Yeah.
Are we kind of presenting her as kind of like a battered wife or abused wife in any kind of a way?
I think, yeah, like she is strong and probably has learned, through difficulty, how to navigate herself around her husband. But yeah, she,
because I think if
we're
you
definitely
do
like
that,
presenting
then,
Nabal as like a pretty problematic person. Yeah.
It would just kind of ramp up what she's doing, the danger and the stakes of what she's
Yeah.
doing, and why
That's
it's
true,
even
because
more
she's like,
important.
yeah,
She
she's
knows
used to-
what could happen if it goes bad.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. And that also highlights kind of the contrast, like David, like she's able to go to him even kind of in this moment of fury, and even though he's got that violence in his heart, at the very least he is able to be pacified. Yeah, although it's still kind of an uncomfortable scene for David. Yeah.
Well, I think the heart attack is where we want to use. I think it's called the Wilhelm scream.
Hmm.
Is that right?
Well,
Yeah, this you have to use it once, and it's there. I vote Nabal's heart attack. So right there,
Okay. Yeah,
we got that
sounds good.
checked off the list now.
yeah, we did it.
Awesome. Cool. So, like I said, episode 9 is kind of the David's wives episode. Cold open, we have Abiathar going to Jezreel and presenting himself as an ambassador for David, and the local noble there basically asks, like, what does David want? We would have Ahinoam kind of present for the scene, but we don't actually kind of spell out in that exact moment what Abiathar is going to ask for. Back in kind of David's home base, we'll have, or actually not David's home base. So Jehoiada will travel to Nabal's household, because last episode ended with Abigail returning to Nabal's household and Nabal dying there. So Jehoiada will be following up because he's worried about how Nabal will respond when she hears about what Abigail did for David and his men. So he's checking in on her, and he discovers Nabal died because no cell phones or whatever. So this is the first that they have heard of it. I mean, it's probably fairly close to when it happened. And then as they're talking, one of Nabal's kinsmen is going to arrive with the plan to claim Abigail for himself. Because within ancient Israel, often wives would be kind of considered the prerogative of nearest kinsmen to take on for themselves, so that they can keep the land within the family. And we'll kind of get the sense that Nabal's kinsmen, very similar to Nabal, like jerk of a guy, kind of viewing Abigail as his property, that kind of thing. Meanwhile, we'll have Jonathan, kind of a feast following the victory of the Israelites over the Philistines, where Saul is honoring Jonathan and Palti for their place in the battle. That's kind of Saul's attempt to patch things over with his son for a bit, because they've been a little tense recently because of stuff with David. But the sticking point is, Saul is talking big words about how, he's hoping it's a new day for Israel, and, God has had mercy on them, and let's get a new fresh start and all this stuff. But Jonathan's basically like, what about for David? Like, will there be a fresh start for David? Are we going to give him a new day as well? And Saul, has none of that. He basically is like, we saw David, he had like an entire army. If he wanted to just go off by himself into the nations or whatever, he wouldn't have to worry about anything. Like, I wouldn't come like chase him off if he was off in some other nation. But why is he sticking around? Why is he building this army? Why should I trust him? And then he's going to reveal to Jonathan that he's planning on awarding Michal, who was David's first wife, to Palti, the kind of other hero of the battle, as kind of a good job. And Jonathan is kind of alarmed at that. And then meanwhile, back at kind of the area around David, Jehoiada is escorting Abigail back to David's house, or to David's caves, because she has a request for him. She shows up and tells David that she wants him to claim her for himself, so that Nabal's jerk kinsman can't claim her instead. But just then, as she's talking to David, Abiathar arrives, coming back from Jezreel, and he's got another person with him, and it's Ahinoam, who he reveals he went on Joab's orders. He was sent to Jezreel to collect as a potential bride for David. So David's kind of being confronted by these two potential brides almost at the exact same moment. Any thoughts on?
This is where we cue like the type of episode where it's like the characters like trying to hide the fact that they're dating two people at once. That's what this is right here.
Or it's like an episode of The Bachelor where David's got to pick. He's got to give his rose to one of the ladies.
I like in like ancient Near East like version of The Bachelor where it's just like, here's a man with like 20 women, and it's like it's one episode. It's like you can have them all. So okay, what was my question? I had a couple of questions here. Yeah, I guess the main one is when it says Saul tries to reconcile with Jonathan. What does Jonathan think deep down like his father Saul should do? Like what like is it just to reconcile with David or to concede the kingdom or something to David?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think Jonathan is still like, at the very least, he's probably politic enough to realize that Saul's not going to be ready to like totally step down at this point. But if he can at least get Saul to let David back in, or end hostilities with David, that would be like a good step. Jonathan believes that David is going to be the king. He expresses that pretty clearly, but he's probably not going to lead with that with Saul at this point.
Oh, other idea. Maybe it's obvious, but the let's see where Nabal's kin. He needs to be like just the worst. Like, definitely needs to be something like a bro or something like where he really thinks he's hot stuff or something. I mean, yeah. There needs to be some comedic relief, I think, with that character, unless that doesn't fit with other things that you have. But he's kind of ripe for being a character.
It could kind of
like
also
that.
be a Jewish hillbilly too.
Yeah,
like he just assumes like, hey, I'm here to pick up my wife, my wife.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I guess I was thinking more like some guy who thinks he's hot stuff and really full of himself. But in any case, something that's like
it needs to be. It needs to be have some fun with that one.
Yeah, do you think so, Kevin, or is that not fit with what you've sketched out?
No, I mean I didn't get too in depth into his character, but I love that. Yeah, either.
Well, just also with just all of the relationship stuff. I mean, it's like it's even talking about it. It's confusing how all this works, and I think that would be fun to play that up.
Yeah,
especially with some characters that are also just kind of goofy, or at least stereotypical for what we think of that kind of thing.
Yeah,
it's like a very like Full House, Family Matters 90s sitcom kind of thing, but like have the actor who plays Nabal's kin is just the actor for Nabal, but with just like some sort of makeup or prosthetic, whatever, to make him look slightly off, but it's pretty obvious that's the same guy. And he's just the worst.
Oh, that's awesome.
I'm like not joking, because I feel like, again, using The Chosen as like a reference point with what I've seen of it, it's like they're really good about like including things, maybe not like that, like sitcom-y, but like things that are pretty funny. Maybe again, you've seen more than I have, but it's good to have things like that mixed in there. Yeah.
See, like this is where I feel like our like collaboration works, because like you guys have a better sense of humor, I think, than I do. But that, like, as you're mentioning that idea, I love it. Yeah.
And this is like the right this is the right place to do it too. It's like relationship stuff. You can kind of play with that a little bit more than any of the other serious stuff.
Yeah.
I want to see where the rest of this goes to see like what actually could be, and not that everything needs to be funny, but it is kind of like this is where like funny things can happen, like or it can be really
like-
serious too. But we'll see here, I guess, as we go
Yeah,
on.
yeah.
And what's David's reaction? I mean, what's his? Is he just like just having to deal with this, or is none of this seems to be his idea? So he's just kind of
Yeah, so that's going to be act one. We just kind of get like his like kind of oh crap face, and then act two will open up with kind of David having a little bit of a council with some of his men, some of his advisors. So Jehoiada is going to be pushing for Abigail because he's got a good relationship with her and he's like concerned for her and everything. He'll be kind of making the case for her. Abiathar, he's been sent to get Ahinoam, so he doesn't want all of his work to go to waste, and he's also concerned that if David, like they promised to kind of Ahinoam's father that David is a potential suitor, and it'll seem like kind of an insult if they end up sending her back because she wasn't good enough for whatever. And Joab has the foresight to be like, hey, you can take both of them because that means like double the connections with different families. Abigail, you can take over Nabal's estate. Ahinoam, you can get supplies from Jezreel, which is a very fruitful area. So, Joab is kind of thinking very pragmatically, thinking, this is a great way to establish you. This is what kings do. And he can kind of explicitly draw that out that, maybe this isn't normal for average men to have multiple wives, but, kings, for the sake of their people, they build alliances through their wives. But David, ultimately, like at this point in the story, he's not ready for it. So he's basically like, I already have a wife. I don't need another wife. And so he initially shuts it down. And so, he'll kind of walk away from that conversation. Meanwhile, we'll jump to Jonathan. He's kind of gone to find Michal to tell her about Saul's plan to give her away to Palti, even though she's technically still married to David, and she's annoyed at Saul for treating her like an object, but she'll also be a little annoyed at David because she's been here the whole time. Like she'll be like, he could have tried to rescue me or bring me with him, and she'll have some back and forth with Jonathan. Jonathan might be like, would you even want to be out there in the wilderness with David? And she'll kind of recognize like, yeah, probably not. But Jonathan basically, she'll be kind of come away at this point of like being like, what can I do? Like my father is determined to do this. And unless David wants to come here and fetch me and whisk me away with him, then I guess this is what's going to happen. And so then Jonathan leaves that conversation kind of determined to go get David and try to like get him to save Michal. So Jonathan rides off to get David. Meanwhile, Jehoiada and Abiathar, they have a chance to reconnect and reflect a little bit on kind of Jehoiada's failure in trying to take matters into his own hands. Abiathar will regret kind of the part that he played in kind of introducing kind of that thought to Jehoiada, and they'll both kind of realize like ultimately we just need to trust David. They'll kind of like be reaching that conclusion, and yet at the same time this is a really complicated situation and they're not really sure what David should do. And we'll have David, he'll finally get to connect with Benaiah and kind of like see his younger self in Benaiah and kind of long for kind of the days of when things were simpler and he just had to live by faith and follow God. And Benaiah will kind of gently chide him a little bit and be like, maybe things are actually simple, and like maybe you're making them too complicated. And David will kind of like encourage Benaiah, like, don't let anyone quash that faith that you have, and do what you have to follow God. Don't worry about appeasing other people. And we'll realize that Benaiah is kind of, he's thinking through we established in earlier episodes that Benaiah feels kind of called to stick by Jonathan, even though he's been brought to David's camp. He kind of wants to go back or he feels like he should be with Jonathan and helping him. And so that'll kind of jog that thought for him. And then as David's talking to Benaiah, Jonathan actually shows up and he talks to David, but he senses that something's wrong. And then, we'll be kind of setting up Act 3. Yeah.
Yeah. Walk us through like how you, like there's definitely with this act, I'm trying to think. There's some moving the plot, like Jonathan tells, how do we pronounce her name? Michal, like Saul's plan. And, but then you throw in some conversation, not throw in, but like you decided that like, here's a time where like these two characters need to talk about something. So you have Jehoiada and Abiathar. You're like, this is a conversation that should be here. And then also David connecting with Benaiah. So can you walk us through just your process where how you arrived at like, this is a good spot for two conversations between these two sets of characters?
Yeah. So this episode is, I'm trying to do like some setup as far as like helping characters get to the place that they need to for episode 10. And there's a little bit more space to do it in this episode. So that's part of it. And also part of it is like, we've kind of established that Jehoiada and Abiathar are friends, but we haven't had them on screen for a few episodes together. So this is like a chance for them to connect. And this is, we also kind of wanted to establish that connection between David and Benaiah, but they haven't really been able to be on screen together. So this is also kind of a chance for them. And then through those connections, the one with David and Benaiah is particularly going to be important for this episode, whereas the Jehoiada and Abiathar one is more kind of getting those characters, like helping them kind of work towards where they need to be for next episode.
So wait, David and Benaiah, can you say again what that conversation is about? It's like,
so Benaiah is the younger servant boy. So David is kind of like seeing himself in Benaiah a little bit. And Benaiah is kind of like pushing, like David feels like, oh, I wish I was back like you still. I miss those days when things were simple. So he's kind of like seeing the complexity of his situation right now, where he's like juggling multiple wives and all the different things that are going on. And he's longing for the days of when he was more like Benaiah. And Benaiah is like, kind of pushing him to question whether the simplicity is due to his situation, or the lack of simplicity is due to his situation, or some of the choices that he's making. Yeah.
I love that, like, you can totally picture, even again, like in a, not to make it a sitcom kind of thing, but like a modern TV show, like, father son, or like, it's like, oh, girls or women or something, like where they're like, oh, how do we do this? Like, I wish, like you can totally set the episode up to kind of riff off that. But I love that it's like, it even works like it's a very modern kind of thing, but it's like putting it in the context of like, the Bible, where it's like, oh, it's so complicated. Like girls, like which wives do I, 1, 2, 3. So again, not to make it funny necessarily, but like kind of like it can be a very sweet moment too, where and very relatable in that sense. And I kind of like when you can take, I don't know. It is interesting how many times we think of like modern TV or movie tropes, because they really are just like variations or just riffing off of like common human experiences that like, so it gives people like, for something that might feel really foreign, like the idea of having multiple wives, you know, it's like anytime you can kind of make something seem a little relatable, yeah, that's probably to the good, I suppose.
Yeah, no, I totally like the idea of having some humor in there. Yeah, because it is like a little more talky section of the episode, so that the humor also can kind of move us through it, so it doesn't feel like too dull or and humor also can actually like hit some of those emotional like notes, like help us actually feel the things that we're supposed to feel too. So
I remember way back whenever we first started talking about it, we talked about how some of the men just might be having conversations about, you know, David's marital situation, you know, and that's how we can kind of introduce a lot of how the different tiers of, you know, who has to marry who, and you know, political versus romantic sort of things. I think it'd be fun because like there would probably be some people in his group that'd be like, you know, how lucky is David to have multiple wives? But when we see the real story, it's like, this is a nightmare. This is his worst possible nightmare for him. But there could be at least one guy be like, you know, that David just got it made.
yeah, I like that. Yeah, I don't know specifically who that would be, but I definitely think it'd be fun to have that character. Yeah. So then, moving into Act 3. So Jonathan's arrived, and Jonathan learns from David that David's got a couple potential wives here for him, in addition to Jonathan's sister Michal. And David learns from Jonathan that Saul is planning on giving Michal away to someone else. And so there's some tension there where, on the one hand, you know, Jonathan was coming here hoping that David would go get Michal and bring her back and kind of keep that union alive. And he shows up, and instead, like, it seems like David is about to marry these two other women, and like, and he's a little bit frustrated. Like he was defending David to Michal herself, but when he's talking to David, he brings some of Michal's frustration that David hasn't done anything, and he's kind of left her alone and hasn't like tried to recover her or anything. So there's a little bit of a falling out between the two as they're kind of having a tension over all the stuff that's happening. Yeah, Victor.
Do they have any kids yet at this point?
Are you talking David and
Michal? Yeah.
Yeah.
Any children in this?
No, I think biblically, I don't think David and Michal ever have any kids.
They didn't. Okay.
Yeah, because that would make it more complicated too. Yeah. So yeah, and then meanwhile, we have Nabal's kinsman, the jerk guy. He comes and basically is like demanding his property. You know, Abigail, that David returns her to him because she's his rightful claim. And then we'll have a scene where Jonathan gets to connect with Abigail. She's kind of afraid, like she's figured out who Jonathan is, and that Jonathan's sister is David's other wife, and she feels bad about kind of throwing this wrench into things, and she's worried that like Jonathan is going to hate her for it, but he ends up having kind of compassion for her, and it's kind of a scene to help him kind of process through his frustrations, but kind of come to a more sympathy for David's situation. And then David, as a result of his conversation with Jonathan, he felt guilty, and so he actually he's decided he's going to go try to get Michal, like saddle up and try to rescue her, even if it means going out on his own. But Jehoiada convinces him to stay, looking back on his own experience of kind of trying to go after his son, and like kind of doing that, even though it meant like leaving the men and kind of endangering the group or whatever. And Jehoiada will kind of be pushing David to just do what's best for the men, which means kind of in his eyes at least, taking on Abigail and Ahinoam. And kind of point out like you end up you're gonna have to fail someone at some point. And then Jonathan and David, they'll reconcile, and they'll renew their oaths to be kind of faithful to each other. And then David will have a double wedding with Ahinoam and Abigail. Thoughts on Act 3?
What was the where it says can't be there for everyone?
Yeah, so that's Jehoiada basically kind of looking back on like he felt like in his own life he felt a pull between like being loyal to the men and being loyal to his son and trying to go out and get his son, and he'll kind of push David to like question like, you've got these men that are all looking to you, and it looks like going out and trying to get Michal, that's not going to be what's best for them. So you're going to have to choose, like, are you going to kind of be here for your men, or are you going to go and be there for Michal? You're going to have to kind of let someone down. And I mean, it's questionable whether Jehoiada's advice there is correct.
Okay.
But basically he's counseling David to feel like he's got to he's got to choose between kind of doing what's best for the men or doing what's best for his former wife. And he might also point out like, this is actually going to be better for her anyway, because do you think she's going to want to come out here into the desert? And he might try to soften it a little bit, but
how are we supposed to feel about the double wedding? Like, or what's the mood of the scene? And
so I think we'll be relieved that David and Jonathan are reconciled, but one of the takeaways of this episode, for David at least, maybe not for it's going to feel like David can't, he's going to have to fail in some sort of way. He's like kind of caught himself up in like kind of so much complexity and so many kind of webs of different obligations that he's kind of going to have to let someone down. And so we're going to feel like kind of complicated feelings about it.
Mm-hmm.
Jonathan, in a sense, will be kind of a good emotional touch point for us, where Jonathan, he'll be at the wedding. He's there for his friend. He's like, he loves his friend, but he'll also have like some sadness in that moment, because he's seeing his friend, who's also his brother-in-law, marry 2 other women, and choose not to go after his own sister.
We've talked about this, I guess, before, this being just like one of the challenges that like people are going to have a good amount of your audience that's thinking like, the Bible, like, it teaches one man, one woman, and like, so therefore like we should feel like this is very strongly like David's doing the wrong thing, obviously, because there are 2 women and it's not the first, it's not doesn't include even his first wife. So how will you kind of, it sounds like you're trying to, I'm not saying this is wrong, I'm saying that this is one of the challenges, is that like the the expectation might be that like, oh, we should be condemning David for this here.
Right.
And do you feel like the episode is set up well enough to kind of challenge that, so that people actually do feel by this point that like, yeah, this is actually kind of tricky? And is it supposed to reinforce this idea that like, not just for David, but for all of us, like we can be faced with, grays in life that are like really not clear what to do? Or are we supposed to feel like sympathetic, but still like probably the wrong thing to do? Like, I don't know. Where would you like your audience? What do you think? Do you kind of sense this challenge, and do you feel like how you've set this up, like kind of?
So I kind of want the audience to be like left like feeling complicated and not being quite sure. And so like the conversation with David and Benaiah, that presents like one potential perspective on the situation where like maybe actually David feels like this is complicated, but maybe it's actually a lot simpler. Like maybe David just needs to leave his men and go get Michal and, just trust God. And, maybe the reason that things feel complicated is because David needs to, or he feels like he needs to, kind of take care of these different like potential alliances and potential like food sources and things like that. And so maybe the reason that there's all this complication is because David is working too much and like from a worldly standpoint. So we kind of established like that as like a potential vantage point. And then there's Jonathan, who like there's also kind of like the personal aspect of it for him. It feels like a more like kind of personal betrayal, but at the same time, he loves his friend. He has sympathy for his friend. He wants to be there for his friend, even if he doesn't 100% agree with his friend's decision. And then there's also like Abigail, where it's like, if David doesn't take her in as his wife, then that means, this jerk, Nabal too, is going to get her. And so like we have like sympathy for her, and basically trying to kind of throw like a lot of different complicating factors, so that we're kind of left like questioning and pondering it. Yeah.
Okay. No, that makes sense. Yeah. Yes, that does make sense. I didn't catch the whole thing with Abigail, like, or I just wasn't paying attention up with Nabal's kin. Like that presents a real challenge to what might feel like the obvious, simple answer of Benaiah, where it's like, even if you don't want to just say like, oh, that's invalid or something once there's a complication, but it's like, I don't know how all these things, like, I don't know what the right thing to do is. It kind of reminds me, if I'm getting this right, like in some places in the history of like Christian mission, it's like you have missionaries going to societies or cultures where there is polygamy. And it's not so simple, they found, to just be like, oh, just have one wife and just like divorce the rest, because then you had in that culture, like that was a way that women were supported, not left, in a culture where they couldn't, for various reasons, like support themselves. And so am I getting that right?
Yeah.
Kind of feels like something like that, where it's like, oh, you go in thinking, I know the answer, it's simple, like just one wife, like, and ditch the rest. But it's life can be more complicated than that. And so what do you feel like, sorry to press this, but what is that, just like a message just for this episode, where it's just like, is that like one of the takeaways? And I guess we'll get to the last act here, but is that kind of like one of the messages that like, hey, even for faithful people, like it's not always clear like what faithfulness looks like? And if that's the message, you can correct me if I'm wrong. How does that, like, thinking of the season as a whole, like what role does that message play given some of the other themes we've explored? Does that make sense what I'm asking?
Yeah. So like at the very least, that it's not always clear. Like I'm not sure if Benaiah, like he might actually be, I think probably the most right perspective on it. Not actually what David. Well, Benaiah doesn't necessarily like tell David what to do, but in some ways, I think that maybe David should go get Michal and to hell with the consequences. But that's easy for me to say, like looking back on it and not being in that situation. So I'm like trying to, like you said, like create a complicated situation where a character does something that we look back on as like strange and something that we think is obviously immoral, but I'm trying to help us sympathize for where they're at and sympathize that like this is something that happens a lot in First and Second Samuel, where the book creates a really complicated situation and then a character has to make a judgment call, and sometimes like we don't know what the right judgment call is, and like sometimes as people are preaching through the book, they simplify it and are like, yes, the character made the right judgment call, or no, they didn't. And a lot of times like the book actually doesn't like state what the right judgment call is. So that is something that I wanted to kind of recreate in the show.
That seems like an effective way, because again, we talked about this as one of like the challenges going into the show. Like, oh, how do you deal with like David and his wives, and like that's recognizing that like that's a live question for people who are watching the show or people who read the Bible. It's like, how do I make sense of this whole phenomenon of polygamy, which doesn't always receive like full treatment, and you're kind of have to read between the lines. And so I kind of like how you your way of addressing that obstacle is not just having a dialogue between two characters where it's like, oh, this is obviously the right thing, and it confirms, I don't know, this particular view of what the Bible teaches. You are trying to invite people to experience like what might be just real tensions, and I don't know, I think it's an interesting way to tackle the issue.
And also just a reminder that we're kind of primarily in the shoes of David's men and also maybe Jonathan, and so kind of the choice for them as David is facing this really complicated decision, what is clear is that they are called to stick by David, kind of regardless of to kind of trust him or to stick with him through the difficult decisions where it's not really clear what the right choice is, and to follow him through.
And we could do a lot just to really just set it up earlier, just the fact that this is a possibility, or especially for people like, well, David, one day you're going to be king, and you're going to have multiple wives like Saul does, or like the other kings do. He may even say like, well, no, I'm not going to have to worry about that. That's not going to be me. And then he comes to this where he has all these choices that he doesn't want to make, but he's like, well, I guess I've got to do this, So we'll even have it's something that the men could have been discussing, over the course of several episodes, and just kind of a roundabout kind of way, just about how that works, but just kind of seeding it that I mean, that's something that happens. It's not completely crazy, and David even can acknowledge, I don't want to do that, or that's not something I'm planning on doing. Michal's my wife, and that's it. And then it comes to this, and like, you're the king, these are the kind of choices you're going to have to make. You don't want to do it, but that's just what you got to do if you're going to be in this position of leadership or power.
And then Act 4, on David's wedding night with the two wives, Nabal's kin and his men attack their base. David wants to go out and defend, but Jonathan tells him to stay here. This is your wedding night. Like, you shouldn't be going out. So Jonathan goes with David's men, and they kind of push back Nabal's kinsmen. They don't kill him. And then, Jonathan kind of comes in and he gets kind of a final parting with David, and then the next day he's getting prepared to go home, kind of having like his goal was not accomplished, but he's gotten to kind of reaffirm his friendship to David. And Benaiah comes up to him and wants to return back with him and go back home because he's been reminded that he should pursue his purpose, even though he feels pulled between his father and Jonathan. He's realized that he's going to have to let someone down as well. And so he chooses to go with Jonathan because he feels like that's where God has called him to. Then meanwhile, Saul is kind of overseeing the betrothal of Palti and Michal. And as he's doing that, Nabal's kin, the jerk, will arrive and report to him that, what happened, like that he has David's location, basically. So that's set up for next episode.
It almost seems like the theme of this episode is you're going to have to let people down. Or
Yep.
A lot of people are just going to be let down in a lot of different ways and have to deal with it.
Yep.
Yep. The wedding, is that going to be a ceremony or is it going to be like just a little quiet? How is that going to be presented?
I think we wouldn't necessarily do like the full thing. Like we might kind of get like the opening of it, but probably have.
Is it a big event for them?
Probably like, yeah, probably probably a celebration of like with the men and stuff. I mean, they don't have a ton of stuff, a ton of supplies and stuff, so it can't be like a huge feast, but some sort of celebration as best they can manage. And Abiathar would probably be like performing whatever the ceremony is.
I feel like I think of all the stupid and maybe irreverent ideas, and so I think of like after the ceremony, there's just a moment where they're gonna go like for the consummation in some tent, and then David just goes, "So who wants to go first?"
That's the closing credits scene. We're going through the credits, and then you.
What were some of my other ideas? Not along the same lines, but just kind of little things.
Well, if you wanted to do it, could be two weddings, and David's got to go back and forth between the two weddings. Now it's time, and he's getting the vows wrong between each one.
Oh man, Easter egg, because we're not including this scene. In fact, I can't remember for the life of me. It's that one with like the goat hair and is it the household god with Michal? Like,
oh yeah,
is it where David escapes?
Yep, David escapes,
and she like kind of. Yeah, there's got to be something. Is it goat hair?
Oh yeah,
and
they like cover her like household idol in like goat hair or something. Yeah,
that just needs to be an Easter egg somewhere in the episode. Like it's in the background somewhere, or someone's
like in her house when Jonathan goes to visit her or whatever.
Something like that, or that should be included as like a little bonus kind of thing for the those who know, and then actually I guess this is really stupid too. Again, sorry, I'm full of all the stupid ideas, but they can be, they have their place. It's like, again, maybe it's because I was thinking of Steve Urkel, and then when he turns into Stefan, and it's like, you just need to take the name Nabal and just like make it sound a little more stupid, like Nubul or something, or I don't know, just some twist on the name. I'm just stuck on what I'm picturing for that character, and he's, anyways, he's just like a comedic twist that's just somehow worse than Nabal. So, no, I like this episode because it seems to really just stand out from all the others, and I think that's I think it's good for it not to feel samey all the time. If it's just battles all the time, or so that's one of the strengths I think of the show is, as you kind of sketched it out, Kevin, is that like there really is good amount of variety. and how the episodes feel, and it's just not one note. It's not just tons of action scenes, laced with conversations. There's I don't know. It seems cool, and I'm curious. It's interesting thinking, probably because we were thinking of all the funny things you could potentially do with it. I don't know how well that works with that then leading up into I would think normally when you're heading into a finale, you kind of want to end on a note that might actually seem like a kind of a serious kind of cliffhanger, leading into what's the resolution going to be if there is one. So actually that would be my last question. Sorry, I just talked a lot here, but how do you see this episode kind of what note should it really end on to lead into the finale? Do you think it should have a bit of a feeling of, unresolution?
So one other bit that I might not have discussed as much. One of the anxieties, I'm not sure if this is for Jonathan, I think for Jonathan, is that Saul will see what David is doing in taking on multiple wives and see that as a power play, and that'll kind of push him on to back to pursuing David again when he sees that it seems like David is making alliances and claiming multiple wives like a little king would do. So that'll be something that kind of is setting up Saul once again, kind of returning to go after David. And then obviously the actual kind of final scene cliffhanger when Nabal's kin arrives to report to Saul, he'll both be telling the location of where David is, but also he'll have this news that David is taking on multiple wives. So.
Okay, that makes sense. That's good. Yeah.
Just one final silly thing. Nabal's kin could be called Cain. So somebody can say, wait, Cain and Nabal? Is that what you're telling me your name is? Anyway,
oh, that's great. I love it. Actually, Kevin, this is really dumb because it's this just seems like it's in English, but it's I have to imagine that if the consonants match up in Hebrew with Nabal, is it are the consonants just the reverse of something like Laban? And maybe that means zero. But it's that was one of the things that came to mind. I was I bet it is just the same consonants, just kind of in reverse. And it's you never know when the Bible's doing a little funny wordplay, and that's one thing. Is your hunch anything to that? Probably not. I'm gonna guess not, but I think it's possible given how that language works.
Yeah, no, that would be really interesting to study, because I mean, both stories involve wife stuff. Laban is the father-in-law of Jacob, right? So I don't have a immediate sense of what a potential connection would be there, but I wouldn't be surprised if there is one.
No. Or if there isn't, or if there is.
Yeah. Cool. Well, it's getting kind of late, so maybe we should save the finale for
big blowout.
Our next.
I think so. Yeah.
Because I like the finale a lot. So
I don't want to rush through that. So Kevin, what do you if we had gone through the finale tonight, what would the next episode be? Are we gonna or the next time we get together to talk, are we gonna do the last episode plus kind of what you were thinking?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I had a few different potential ideas in mind that I was gonna float by you guys, but we can discuss them live. That's okay. And people can leave their thoughts, but some different ideas that we had kind of floated as potential things that we could do on the podcast. And so next episode is probably going to be Chad's last episode, at least for the time being. And we may kind of go on a pause for a little bit, or maybe we'll do another one, me and Vic, at some but we're probably going to since we're kind of bringing an end to the first season, we may pause for a bit, either now or pretty soon. But yeah, maybe it'd be fun to do like casting. If we were able to run through some of the characters. So yeah, I could put together like a cast list, and we could, yeah, if you guys have ideas for who to cast and stuff, we could discuss some of that.
Ooh, could we this isn't probably too ambitious, I feel like, but it would take a little extra coordination. Like some AI art, kind of like.
I was just going to
concept
suggest
stuff.
that.
I feel like that's something we could manage, and we just have to get the images to you, and just the things that might capture things that we're envisioning, or yeah,
maybe we should do that instead. Like the casting, that might be hard to fit in like alongside the finale, but I feel like just doing some AI art and like discussing some like key moments might be a good like kind of recapping the story that we've gone through. Yeah, so that I'd be down for that.
That'd be cool.
Yeah, and I know Victor, you've got some AI tools and stuff too, so maybe you could help me out.
Yeah, it's advanced to the point where you could really pick an actor and say, make them dressed like this now. So
that's awesome.
Oh, you know what? Maybe none of us can do this here, but like people make like, because you can do like little video clips even.
Yep.
And you like a little AI kind of made trailer. For the show. That might be, I don't know if that's something you know how to do, either of you, but that's
definitely doing that.
Yeah,
it's definitely happening at some point before we're done with season 1. We're going to have the trailer for it. So
that'd be really
awesome.
Cool.
Yeah, this could be kind of doing some images might be a good kind of starting point to moving towards something like that. So cool. Well, because we would have to, we might do, different actors or whatever if we did some AI art. If you do have actor suggestions or whatever, yeah, throw those in the comments or email me or whatever. And if either of you guys have ideas for who should play a certain character, yeah, we can discuss those offline too.
Sounds good.
Cool. Well, yeah, thanks guys for walking through those 2 episodes. Yeah, I agree, Chad. Episode 9, it was a lot of fun to do, and yeah, I feel like it's been cool to kind of see how our story has evolved and like kind of some of the stuff we've gotten to explore. So, but anyway, that's it for tonight. Thanks to anyone who has joined us, and we hope you'll join us in a couple weeks for our finale episode discussion and some AI art. So thanks again, and Godspeed.